Your objective is to find and buy shares when they're cheap and sell them when they're expensive. So that implies that shares move in cycles, which they do. So let us examine the cycle and see what is going on. I'm going to draw a beautiful sine wave, which you don't often see in the share market, but it's useful for explaining my point. And of course, the share has a real value. Now you might find that some analysts would say that there's no such thing as a real value for a share. But the same analyst, probably in the same sentence, will say such and such shares are cheap or expensive or overpriced or underpriced. In relation to what? In relation at least to his perception of the real value of that share. And you and I, we know that shares oscillate from being overpriced to being underpriced. That's just common sense. So let us look at the cycle and see what is going on. Your objective is to find and buy the share somewhere near to this bottom point, so that you can benefit from that upward cycle. So, at this bottom point, at the lowest point in the cycle, the smartest money is buying the share. These are the people who've done their homework. They've studied the balance sheet and the income statement, they've studied the charts, they've assessed that the share is underpriced, that it's due for an upward move, so they buy the share. And their transaction moves the share price up to that point, at which stage we have another group of investors coming in who are not quite as smart as these guys who bought at the bottom. But they're still pretty smart. They also did their homework. It's just that they needed that little movement there to act as a confirmation for them. And their transaction moves the market up to this point, at which stage we have another group of investors coming in who are again not quite as smart as these guys. And so we go on up the cycle with less and less smart individuals getting in at each point. And then we cross this magical barrier here. And nobody knows quite where that is. But this is the interesting thing. The share becomes overpriced. And yet despite that, it continues to go up with less and less smart, or if you like now, more and more stupid individuals getting into the market at each point. And then somewhere near the top here, we have Joe Citizen. Now Joe Citizen is a music teacher. He doesn't know anything about money and investment, nothing about the share market. He doesn't read any financial newspaper. But he's got an appointment with the dentist and he's stuck in the waiting room for half an hour. And on the table is a copy of the Business Day. And in the middle of the front page of that newspaper is an article about this company. And it's a very good article. It says what fantastic management they have. They've got new products coming out. They're beating the competition to hell. They've covered forward on their foreign exchange, and so on and so forth. And it is complete with a graph. And the graph shows that the share price has doubled in the last 6 months. I mean, that's the proof, isn't it? That's what Joe Citizen looks at. And he says, wow, what an incredible company. The share price has doubled in the last 6 months. This is the proof, isn't it? This is a fantastic investment. So he rushes over to the receptionist and he borrows the phone. And he phones through to his bank manager and he arranges for an extension on his overdraft. Now the bank manager looks there on his computer and he sees that Joe Citizen owns a house, you know, collateral. So he has no problem at all extending Joe Citizen's overdraft. Then Joe Citizen phones his stockbroker and he says, look, I've got to have some of these shares. Now the broker, of course, gets a percentage of the value of the transaction. So he also has no problem with Joe Citizen buying these shares. So Joe Citizen quickly tears out the article from the newspaper and rushes home to his wife. And he says, we're going to be rich. We're going to be rich. Look at this. What a fantastic company. They've got incredible management. They've got new products coming out. They're beating the competition to hell. They've covered forward on their foreign exchange. And the share price has doubled in the last 6 months. I mean, that is the proof, isn't it? But his wife is not quite sure about what he's done. She can only see that he's spent an awful lot of money on something that they really can't afford. So after a while, Joe Citizen realizes he's not getting the feedback he wants from his wife, the confirmation, so he leaves the house and he goes down to the pub. And there, that whole evening, he's telling his friends about this incredible company. He's extolling its virtues. What an incredible company. Fantastic management. New products, beating the competition. Covered forward on their foreign exchange. He doesn't understand what that means, but it sounds very impressive. And so on and so forth. Anyway, as you and I know, around about that time, the share price turns and it starts to fall. And at first, Joe Citizen is blasé. He says, okay, it's just a correction in an overall bear trend. You see how he learns the language of the market. But it doesn't get better. It gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. And now his wife's on his back because, you know, she could have bought a new motor car with that money. And what's he doing messing around with something he knows nothing about? She's quite right, of course. And it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. And now, when he goes to the pub, the guys at the pub laugh at him. They open the newspaper and say, how much did you lose today? And it just gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. And eventually, Joe Citizen just can't take it anymore, so he sells the shares. And we all know who buys it back from him, don't we? The smart money. And you see, this cycle goes on in the market year in and year out. And it will continue to go on for so long as we have people with different levels of knowledge and experience about the markets. So now I want you to make a great transition in the way that you think. Because your objective is to find and buy the share at this bottom point. And if you want to find and buy it here, you must find it over there. So that when this moment comes, you are ready for it. You're waiting for it. And this is the big difference between professional investors and amateurs. You see, amateurs get excited when a share is going up. Professionals get excited when a share is going down. If you want to buy it at that bottom point, you must find it over here. And that means you must change your attitude. You must change your approach, your perceptions. So from now on, I want you to look for the bad news in the newspaper. You know, strike, hammers, pick and pay. Get excited. Because that gives you the opportunity to perhaps buy that share when it's very cheap.